In this Writer's Toolbox video, we'll be discussing how to analyse evidence. Now, sometimes teachers will tell you, analyse this, analyse the text, but what does it actually mean to analyse? It's a small word which has a big meaning. Well, one thing you can do is you can break down the small parts and how they contribute or affect the whole system, like a systems analysis. You can point out cause and effect relationships. You can make inferences to explain what is not said on top of what is said. You can draw links between things from the story and then bigger ideas out of the story, such as events in history, other books, or the author's life. You can explain the importance of the elements and parts of a larger system. And you can compare and contrast. You can compare and contrast things like characters, devices, the text to other texts or real events, the conflicts. Now let's look at what a systems analysis might look like in a different class, such as science. Well, we've got a cell here. Now, in a systems analysis, I want to first look at tier 1, the smallest parts. Now, what are the smaller parts of a cell? Well, the smallest parts of a cell could be the ribosomes, which contain RNA and help synthesize proteins. I'm not a science teacher. I know very little about this, but I'll work my way through. So tier 1 is always the smallest parts of a whole and the effects of those things, their purpose. Tier 2 then is the function of the whole and how the whole is affected by the smallest parts. So in the case of this cell, the large number of the ribosomes make it especially effective at producing proteins. So I'm talking about the whole cell now. I've gone from talking about the ribosomes and their purpose, they contain RNA, they help synthesize proteins. Now I talk about the cell as a whole. It's a protein cell. It's effective at producing proteins. Tier 3 then, how does the whole interact with what is around it? What are the effects? So how does this cell interact with things around it? Well, this cell in meat might help humans synthesize more protein and repair muscles. Now, this type of thinking, this concept of analysis, can be transferred to any subject. Level 1, the smallest parts and their effect and their purpose. Level 2, the whole. And level 3, connections outside of the whole. But let's look specifically at English. Well, level 1, or tier 1, what I want you to do is identify figurative language, lexical choice, things that really strike out to you. And I want you to discuss the effect of these things. What does it make the reader think? Or what does it make the reader feel? Now I have a picture of a magnifying glass here because the way I like to imagine it is that at this level you are an investigator, you're a detective, really looking as close as you can at the words and the phrases in the text. You can use things like this is saying, this means, and this piece of X makes the reader think Y. Once you have level 1, we can move up to level 2. I've got glasses here. The reason I have glasses is because you've taken a step back. You're not looking really close with a magnifying glass. You're just at normal distance now and you're looking at the whole book, or the whole poem, or the whole play. And level 2 is to apply what's been said in level 1 to the whole. So what does what you found in level 1 reveal about the whole character, the setting, the plot, the tone? And I'll go through some examples in a bit. You can use phrases like this reveals, this highlights, this signifies, and this indicates. When we have level 2, I like to feel that we go to the top of the mountain and we use binoculars to look all around us, to look at the world and make connections. How does what you found in level 1 and 2 develop a theme in the novel? What is the message related to that theme? What does the author want to tell us? And also, what connections can you make to real life events, history, things today, the author's life, or other texts, other plays or novels, poems? You can use phrases like this suggests, this demonstrates, this indicates, this alludes to, this is important because. So why do you need to do this? Well, not all thinking is created equally. To analyse is smarter than to just remember something or to identify something. To analyse shows that you really understand concepts and strategies and that you're a real thinker. Also, it fits in with our mantra of say a lot about a little. And I'll say it again, say a lot about a little, say a lot about a little. When you're writing an essay about literature, we want to know about your interpretation, your words, not the author's. Therefore, a paragraph should be a lot of analysis about a few of the author's words, a little of the author. So let's look at some examples. We're going to do 4 examples in this video, so it might take a little while, but hopefully it gives you enough to understand. Now, the first book we'll talk about is Lord of the Flies. Now, the characters in this book are a group of British schoolchildren. Ralph, he's mostly good, he can be a bit of a bully. He's the protagonist, and Jack is a much more violent boy. He is the antagonist. Now, it's set during a fictional World War III era on a deserted island, and the boys are stranded on it. Their plane gets shot down as they escape World War III. The plot? Lord of the Flies tells the story of a group of young boys who find themselves alone on a deserted island. They develop rules and a system of organisation, but without any adults to calm their behaviour, the children eventually become violent and brutal. The author, it's important we look at the author. William Golding was a Navy officer. He fought in World War II. He fought at the battle, D-Day, one of the biggest battles. And he wrote this novel after seeing the violence of war and the violence that humans are capable of. He was also a teacher, and he admits to being a bully himself when he was at school. So he understands British school children quite well. Now, the student has been asked the question, what is the importance of Jack's war paint? This is something that happens in chapter 4. Now, in the novel of Lord of the Flies, Jack, the antagonist, creates a war mask in order to highlight his descent into savagery and foreshadow the violence he is capable of. That's the topic sentence, has the what and how the why. Then we have our context. In chapter 4, the antagonist, Jack, decides to use materials to camouflage his face and body so that he can hunt. He uses materials such as charcoal, torch and berries, which he rubbed over the half of his face and slashed a bar of charcoal across his face. Golding 35. Now, if you've never read the story, you now understand that the antagonist, Jack, wants to go hunting, and to make himself camouflage, he uses, charcoal and berries and chalk to cover himself and make him harder to see so he can hunt animals. Now, looking at the quote I've got here, I need to do my level 1 analysis. So what things really snap out to me? What words, what phrases, what figurative language or literary devices? Well, the first thing I see actually is the word slashed. Now, the author could have used the word rubbed. He could have rubbed black bar of charcoal in his face, but he used the word slashed. Why is that? Well, when I think of the word slashed, I think of knives. So that could be why. Also, red is the colour of blood, and that might be important as well. He's got red on half of his face. So my level 1 analysis would be by using the word slashed instead of rubbed, as it has connotations with knives. Also, the red on his face could remind the reader of blood. Well, then what does this reveal about the whole? What does it reveal about the whole character? Is the character a nice character, or is he quite a violent character? Well, the word slashed and the connotations with knives, the image of blood, would suggest that he is an aggressive character. It shows that he's it reveals that he's a violent character, and it could possibly foreshadow him murdering another boy. Okay, so everything I've got in level 2 now, level 1 and 2, well, what can I make connections to outside? Well, remember that William Golding fought in the war, so he's seen a lot of violence. He knows the violence that man is capable of. So I could link it to him and the theme of human nature in the story. The theme is human nature, and Golding believes that man is capable of much evil, particularly after he saw the horrors of World War II. What I can do there is I can put that all in a sentence, and there you go, that's most of my paragraph done there. Let's look at another example. How is the island portrayed in chapter 1? Well, from the beginning of Lord of the Flies, William Golding depicts the island not as a paradise, but as deadly, through imagery and foreshadowing. Scattered among the beach are skull-like coconuts and decaying palm trees, which could not grow to any height when they reached perhaps 20 feet and they fell and dried. So level 1, what things do I notice there? Well, definitely, skull-like coconuts is a simile, and decaying palm trees added with that is like death imagery. So I've got some literary devices there. Also, the fact that trees don't grow to any height and they die young could be a piece of foreshadowing. So the simile skull-like and death imagery or decaying palms makes the reader think of death. Added to this, the fact that trees die young and do not grow old could be foreshadowing. What's that reveal about the plot or the setting in general then? Well, the island is revealed to be a place filled with death, indicating that it is not safe nor a paradise. Furthermore, the boys might not grow old and die young as the foreshadowing suggests. So I've talked about the setting and the plot as a whole here. Well, what connection can I make to Outside now, level 3? Well, I read a lot of other books before reading Lord of the Flies to get a better insight into it. And what I found was that these types of adventure books where boys get stranded on an island were really popular. There's one in particular actually called The Coral Island, but it's very different. So in The Coral Island, the boys are shipwrecked, but they live really peacefully. But in Lord of the Flies, they don't. They get shipwrecked and they descend into savagery and violence. And I think that Golding tries to subvert this genre and show that, you know, we're not these civil people as these adventure books say we are. We're actually really violent people. And he does that by first showing the island not to be a paradise or an adventure, as many of the other books suggest. Let's have a look at another book. This is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Now, the protagonist is Ebenezer Scrooge. He's a rich, miserable old banker who hates Christmas and is extremely stingy. It's set in Victorian London at Christmas time. And Ebenezer Scrooge is a mean-spirited, selfish old man. He hates Christmas, and one Christmas, he's unkind to his workers. He won't let them take Christmas Day off. He refuses to give to charity. He won't visit his nephew, who comes to ask him to spend time with him. And on Christmas Eve, he's visited by 3 ghosts, well, 4 ghosts if you include his old partner, who show him the error of his ways. Now, Charles Dickens was a 19th century author who often wrote about the inequalities between rich and poor people in Victorian England. Dickens' father actually had to go to a debtor's prison for not paying bills, and Dickens had to go to a Victorian workhouse where they sent young children to work in horrible conditions. Now, how is Scrooge characterised? Well, Ebenezer Scrooge is immediately characterised as stingy and unloving by using similes to describe him. In chapter 1, the narrator describes Scrooge before he has even spoken or acted as hard and sharp as flint from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire, and as solitary as an oyster. Well, level 1 then, I have to look at the words. I have to inspect the words closely and talk about what they make me think or feel. Well, hard and sharp are really negative terms. They're not something that's warm and cuddly, suggesting that he's not a nice person maybe. Steel itself is very cold. He never struck out generous fire. So we have a metaphor and a simile there where it says, you know, when you smack flint and steel, it creates sparks and fire, but he does not do that. He's not generous. He's also solitary as an oyster. Now, an oyster is an animal that has a pearl inside, which could suggest he's rich. So by comparing Scrooge to Flint, particularly as hard and sharp as it makes the reader think of jagged, rough and cold things characterising Scrooge. Also, the lack of generous fire is saying that he's stingy and not warm. Finally, solitary oysters are not only alone, but they also have pearls inside. So what does this say about the whole character? Well, he's definitely rich, he's definitely cold-hearted, tight and rough. And although he's the protagonist, he does not begin very likeable. This could suggest that he's a dynamic character who changes in the novel. Level 3 then, what connections can I make, or what themes does it develop? So Scrooge, being from the upper classes, but also not very likeable, is very similar to other Dickensian characters, such as Miss Havisham in the book Great Expectations, written by Charles Dickens. Rich characters are often seen as selfish characters in Dickensian work, which probably represents Victorian England. Look at one more example. So the question is, how does Dickens create a sense of atmosphere when Scrooge visits the Christmas party in the past? Well, the student has written, Dickens uses anaphora, a type of literary device where we repeat the same word or phrases at the beginning of each sentence or clause, in order to create an atmosphere of busyness and joy during the Christmas party scene. In this scene, Dickens is being visited by the ghost of Christmas past, where he is taken to a previous employer's Christmas party from when he is younger. In the scene, Dickens is repetitive as he writes, "In came the young men and women employed in the business. In came the housemaid, in came the cook, in came the boy from over the way. When introducing each guest at the party, and he describes how they entered specifically, some came in shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. Now, as it says in the topic sentence in the claim, Dickens uses anaphora. That's what I noticed there. There's a lot of repetition, some this, some this, some this, some this. In came that, in came that, in came that. Well, what effect does that have on me? Well, it makes me think there's lots of people there. It also makes me think that it's very busy and fun. And it allows me to really have this image in my head. It's a large party with lots of guests who keep arriving. Well, what does it say about the whole story? Well, the scene differs greatly from Scrooge's past, revealing that there's something that likely caused him to change negatively. In chapter 1, he's shown as this mean, stingy old man. But here we see him, at a young party, and it's a very different scene. So perhaps, like I said, before, he's a very dynamic character who does change. And finally, it develops the theme of family and friendship as Dickens shows a lonely Scrooge as sad and angry, but a Scrooge with friends as much more pleasant. Now, checklist. Have you commented on the effect of particular words or phrases? Have you written about what it shows about the whole character, the plot, the tone, or the setting? And do you make deeper connections outside of the text? Have you linked stuff to a real life event, a historical context, the author's life, or another text? Again, thank you for watching.